Hi all, I have a fascinating game to show you, continuing our evolution of chess style series. So we were looking at the 1951 World Championship match between Mikhail Botvinnik and David Bronstein. This was played in Moscow, the Tchaikovsky Hall, which I'll give a link in the description. Very, very impressive venue, very impressive. So let's see, in this game, in round 11, d4 from Botvinnik, e6. So this welcomes actually a French defense if white is going to play e4, but we see knight f3. In fact, we go into Queen's Indian territory. This is Queen's Indian defense now. g3, bishop e7. Yep, looks pretty standard stuff by modern standards. Even b3, it seems fairly logical to play b3. Double fianchetto. d5. We have c takes, e takes, and our bishop e2. So classic positional solid play from Mikhail Botvinnik here. Nothing too fancy, just securing down central squares, locking down the e5 square. Knight bd7. We see knight c3. Rook e8. And now here is an interesting moment. Usually in this position, rook c1 is played. Usually, for example, here, this is okay. And in fact, the knight can just retreat to d3 here, and this is pretty solid for white. Sure, black's got a good view on e4, but it's fairly balanced. But here we see a very, very interesting, daring play in this position. Instead of rook c1, that's like the modern move, we see knight e5, and it gets incredibly interesting now. The concept behind this knight e5 is actually revealed after bishop f8. Botvinnik just made this a gambit. Yes, he's kind of abusing his super solid opening to make it a pawn gambit now. Rook c1, is it abusing or using? That's the question. Rook c1, yes, he's made it a gambit. Historically, later on, f4 has been played here, as in there's a game against, it was played in Evans. Larry Melvin 2545 against Bent Larson 2625 saw f4, which black won. That was in 1972. But here, yeah, we see rook c1. It's just a pawn sacrifice. Should it be taken? Because its basis is actually using this bishop to create a discovery attack, and look, there's pressure on c7 as well if this knight moves. But Bronstein didn't feel maybe he was a victim of preparation here. If he took this knight and took the pawn, he just took it. He just took it. Yeah, he plays rook takes e5 as well. So we've got discovered attack on the rook now and hitting c7, knight b5. And this looks awkward, doesn't it? Because doesn't it look like a great idea? Because if c7 is now protected, doesn't white have bishop takes f6, damaging the pawn structure? This is exactly what was played. Rook e7, just inviting white to damage the pawn structure. But you know, every cloud has a silver lining here. And the silver lining for David Bronstein, he's got the bishop pair now. This dark square bishop, I know it looks dormant at the moment, but maybe it can be activated later. With no counterpart, you know, the dark squares could be weak later in white's camp. But there's another violent idea, which gives the impression this is a kind of really dangerous, deadly preparation for this game. There's another pawn sack, e4. Yes, this can actually be taken. And black is 2 pawns up, but is there something about these double pawns now in king safety? The gauntlet, the challenge is accepted. The gauntlet is thrown. The challenge is accepted. D takes e4. 2 pawns up. Where's the compensation, Botvinnik? You know, this is a double pawn gambit now. Okay, but what else did black have actually here? This is really dangerous. The pressure on black's position. If he plays c6, For example, check, knight d4 is dangerous. It's looking at c6 and also looking at f5. And if, for example, here queen f4 looks at f6, and this is very, very unpleasant. It just could crumble quite easily. So no target is given with c6. Black just takes this other pawn, 2 pawns up. Show us the preparation. Queen g4 check. Bishop g7 was played. Now I believe this is an accurate move, because if king h8, this position is very scary for black. After rook fd1, you can see huge pressure on black's position, and in fact, where does the queen go here? White would seem to be doing very well here. If queen c8, maybe the queen just nudges to f4, where it's hitting f6 and c7. And if queen e8, knight takes c7, yeah, that's really unpleasant position. But no, actually, you know, bishop g7 was played, and that changes things significantly. It gives the queen a useful square. It vacates f8 actually here. After this, queen f8, yeah, this position. And maybe White didn't want to gain back 1 pawn. It'd still be a pawn down, and it's sort of helping black in a way, but he rejected knight takes c7 here. An example, rook d8, challenging the center file. Knight b5, f5, and black can do another pawn sack as well himself. He's not the only one, because if queen takes f5, this is a loose piece liability. That's winning for black. So that's why this is possible. If this is possible, the bishop looks good, and black might get into the driving seat here. So maybe this is why, again, that's something to be picked on, that b5 knight. No, it's the bishop shut down as well. So this is okay for black. Be a little bit better there. So Botvinnik, he sets to Bronstein, you know, keep your 2 pawns. Knight d4. I'm going to be threatening knight f5 now. This is terrifying play from Botvinnik. You'd think he's like a really stable, solid player, but you know, he started the opening really solidly, and then bang, pawn sack, then another. And now with these double pawns, black's king safety looks pretty suspect here. We see bishop c8 though, a retreat, and it looks as though, hang on, there's loose pieces creeping in. Can black get away with this? Queen h4, threatening bishop takes e4. So we see f5. The bishop does support f5. And now we see knight c6. The rook has to move, surely, and it does. Bishop h3. And yeah, there's a lot of pressure here, but is it justifying the 2-pawn deficit? We see bishop h6, and this is now, all of a sudden, after bishop h6, the dark square bishop, as well as being a nice trump card, White hasn't got the dark square bishop, is actually supporting a massive centralization counterplay strategy. The bishop, I know I was pointing across the center there, but even more significant now, it's facilitating e3, trying to break up potentially White's pawn chain, getting a very nice central bishop now. That pawn is not left as a runaway pass pawn, it's taken. But here, look how black's pieces are starting to centralize. Bishop e6. This bishop's pointing in all directions. This bishop's pretty central now. An interesting idea, by the way, of course, and it's very tempting to look at this and think, why not just pin the knight? In fact, this is a legitimate idea as well. This wasn't played, but if White's daring and plays this, then this position is fine for black. Black would be good here as well as the game, which is bishop e6. We see bishop g2, and here a5 actually. Bishop f3, king h8. And now knight d4, which implies bishop takes a8 and also rook takes c7 is on the cards. But black, he's not keen to defend his c7. He'd rather pursue a ruthless centralization strategy. Black played rook ad8, pinning the knight as well, of course. So not just centralization, but a gigantic pin as well, has to be said. If he had played rook c8, then this pawn's dropping anyway. So yeah, he's safeguarding this pawn, basically giving up this pawn by pinning the knight. Because here knight takes f5 is possible because of this tactical idea, queen f6 check, and queen takes f5, and it will be equal because it's opposite colored bishops. So yeah, he doesn't want to play rook c8 and allow that neat little trick, knight takes f5. He pins that knight, and it's a different story now. Knight takes f5 is not quite the same at all. I believe it can be demonstrated quite easily, actually, that it backfires here. I think we just take here, check, and then bishop d5, and we see, look at those central bishops pointing at the king. No, 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 that's not going to happen now. So, but c7's on, rook takes c7, so it's only one pawn down now for white, and these pawns are doubled, so maybe Botvinnik had a point after all. But things are not just being centralized to look pretty, they are starting to use that center control to point at white's king now after this next move, bishop d5. Yeah, not just pretty, but also pretty dangerous now for white. The threat is bishop takes f3 check and rook takes d1. And here it gets really interesting. It looks as though this is a strange sort of move in some respects, rook e1. Some people have argued, what about rook f1? And there's analysis about rook f1, which is very, very interesting. Let's have a quick look before we go into the games. Rook e1. Rook f1, here, after queen d6, knight takes f5. Black must avoid the trap of queen takes c7, because then queen f6 check is mating. So black here plays instead bishop takes f3, and there's a remarkable line here, technical line, queen d1 check, and have a look at this, rook d2 check. This is a fantastic resourceful line. Can you guess what black can play here? And it's basically a forcing mating line. Really amazing pyrotechnics. So if I give you 5 seconds here, what would you play with black in this position? Okay, rook takes h2. We have check, check, dragging the king out. Rook g8 check. Now say here, there's a pin which we can now exploit with rook g5 check. And here there's a discovered attack and check which we can exploit, discovered check. Rook takes, check, and the king is in a tight spot here, and the killer move is queen d1 check. Beautiful variation. This is forcing mate. Beautiful variation behind the scenes of this game. I think one of the more beautiful variations hidden in this match. Yeah, if rook f1 had been played, which seems like a really plausible move, but it's really dangerous, yeah, after queen d6. So we see rook e1 in the game, queen d6 here, the rook goes to c2, and a really beautiful move in the actual game is played now. Can you guess David Bronstein's move if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video here? Okay, rook e4, yeah, hitting the queen, hitting the knight. That knight's a bit loose. You know, so if the queen moves, we're just going to take the knight, for example. And it's crushing, it's crushing. before we go into that, f4 is also pretty good, by the way. It's also threatening the knight. For example, here we play rook e6, and the knight is kind of pinned. It can't move because the bishop takes f3, mating. So this is why this is now white's just getting crushed here. Like this, white's just getting completely massacred, a piece down. So that's also winning. It shows the strength of black's position. But rook e4 is great and crushing as well. So we have bishop takes. The game's basically decided now. Black's going to have a big material advantage. Yeah, Botvinnik's forced to sack his queen. Knight f5, and there is some potential threats if white's like not careful. But accurate play now, you know, queen b4, forcing the rook to take, not the knight, hitting the rook. And this now means that black can force off a pair of rooks with check and check, forcing off a pair of rooks, and now trying to win more material by hitting the knight. The knight can't move without losing the rook. Here, king g4 was played. It's hopeless. If g4 in this position, black would just play queen f4 and say my next move is h5, basically threatening queen takes g4 mate, and if takes then queen takes. Yeah, it's hopeless, this position. You know, here it's not in time to deliver a checkmate for h5 bang. Yeah, it's not good. It's crumbling for white. So actually in the game, king g4, as if, you know, saying, well, if h5 now, king g5. But an even stronger move is played by David Bronstein, which makes it clear h5 is coming next. Can you see what black plays in this position? One of the strongest, well, no, the strongest move in the position. If I give you 5 seconds, starting from now. Okay, f6, yes, just stopping, ruling out king g5. So the threat of h5 to win the knight, and white has to resign. Yep. This shows actually Mikhail Botvinnik playing a very solid opening, and then bang, pawn sack, then another pawn sack. But he's giving David Bronstein some little details which could be in his favour, like the dark square bishop, and the ability to, of course, sacrifice back pawns if his pawn's up. And he did. He sacrificed back one of his pawns, and it wasn't his double pawn. I mean, he left his double pawns, but then all of a sudden his pieces, we had massive centralisation by black, and the pieces turned their attention to the white king. A remarkable game in many respects. I hope you enjoyed this one. And yeah, one of the more interesting games, I believe, of the match, and some beautiful variations in there. Okay, comments, questions, likes appreciated. Thanks very much.